The wonderful thing is that you redefined the whole heroic image of the director, because the heroic image of the director prior to that was this guy in puttees, strutting around the set with his hat, and his vision. Well, that was the original image, and then it became, the French New Wave director, or Fellini or something, with his vision and seeing things a certain way. Now, to be a real director, you had to put all of your money, everything you owned, on the line, go off to some horrible place where there was a very strong possibility that you would not come back, and it had to be malarial. It had to be, just this horrible situation, and you had to be knee-deep in a swamp, and that's when you were really...
And you had to put your sanity at stake.
Yeah, and then, you had to, at some point in it, be convinced that you had lost your sanity. Otherwise, you weren't really directing.
Really, so often people ask me, who had the idea of the helicopter battle? Who wrote those great lines? I love the smell of napalm in the morning. And I said, that's all John Milius. And as this is what I wanted to talk about, because I wasn't involved in the original creation of the script Apocalypse Now. It was like totally you, and then later George Lucas. So I wanted to ask you first, where did the idea come to you originally, before you had written it or you began to think of writing it?
Well, when I was at cinema school, I sort of became obsessed with the idea that this war was raging on. And I guess that, and I thought, boy, well, this is an interesting place to have a war, a very colorful place to have a war. And it's a very colorful war. And I didn't think of it, I thought, what a great thing to have a movie, and there will be movies about this war. But of course, I didn't think much about me doing a movie about the war, because I figured I was going to go.
Was there still a draft at that time?
Oh, yeah. And I, by being in school, had a temporary deferment. But I knew that I was going to go, and I figured that also I was sort of looking forward to it, because I really didn't think I would ever have a career in the cinema. I really thought I would have a military career that would probably end shortly. And so, I went, and I wanted to fly an F-4, and I went down one time and signed up for the Marine Air Program, and, didn't tell them that I had asthma. And so, very shortly after, I washed out on the idea, and the, fact that I had asthma. I didn't think that was fair. I thought that I didn't have asthma very often. I didn't realize that if you had asthma when you were landing on an aircraft carrier, it could be inconvenient to a lot of other people. And so, but when that happened, it made me reconfigure my whole life, because suddenly I wasn't going to go to Vietnam. I wasn't going to be killed in Vietnam. I would probably live past 26, which I had not planned on. And as most people when they're 20 don't plan very far ahead. And so now I had to think about the whole thing in a different way, and it was about 1968, I think, then. And I started thinking, boy, I really want to do something about this.
And at that time, did you know George Lucas yet, or?
Yeah, I don't remember that in my class, the only undergraduates when I got to USC were George and me and Randall Kleiser, I think, and Basil Polidorus.
So when you began to think about a possible screenplay set in Vietnam, did George know about it from the beginning, or was it something
we would sit down in that center part of that stable. It was an old stable there at USC, and there was an area with grass in it, in between all the buildings, and we would tell stories of all the great movies we were going to make, or we'd discuss some movie that was being, I remember when George saw The Wild Bunch, how excited he was about it. We all had to go out and see The Wild Bunch then. And of course, the other film that everybody loved then was Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah.
And Dr. Strangelove obviously has a profound influence on Apocalypse Now.
Exactly, that's a good point.
So when it came to making a story about Vietnam, The other factor that came into this was my writing teacher, Erwin Blacker, was this very, very tough kind of guy that everybody was afraid of. And he really liked me, and so he was extremely tough on me, but he would really destroy the confidence of most students because they'd start, pitching their story. And he would say, I'm bored. I'm going to make an arrangement to play tennis. If I had a phone here, I'd pick it up right now. And the girl, whoever was delivering the story, would break down and cry. And he says, that's not going to do you a lot of good out there. So he was really good. I mean, the whole idea of what he was trying to do was to, show you what it was going to be like, that you were going to deal with rude people who didn't know anything, who were illiterate and stuff like this. And he would tell, the great thing in his class, he'd tell Hollywood stories. He'd tell about this person doing this, and this is how this happened, and stuff like this. And this was all kind of stories of a world that was somewhere up there on Olympus, that we were never going to get to. So, of course, one of the things he said is he discussed Heart of Darkness. And he said, Heart of Darkness has been attempted many times, and it beat Orson Welles. He couldn't do it. And so, I don't remember who else tried it. Various other people had tried it, and they'd failed. And Heart of Darkness was one of the great stories of all English literature, and it's stumped every great writer, all these great writers, Ben Hecht and, Ernie Lehman, all these fabulous writers. And so that was like waving a red flag in front of a young bull.
I didn't know that. That's great.
And of course, I loved Heart of Darkness. When I was 17 years old, I read Heart of Darkness, and I was in Colorado, where I was going to school at the time, because I was sent away to Colorado to get me away from the beach. And that was like, throwing Brer Rabbit in the briar patch, because living in the mountains of Colorado, I immediately became a mountain man. I had a trap line and went hunting, and I decided that I would then become Jim Bridger, So reading Heart of Darkness was a wonderful thing to do, reading in the middle of winter about the jungles of Africa, in the Congo or whatever, while you're surrounded with snow and feeling, but at the same time feeling like a mountain man, and one of the things that was wonderful about the whole theme of Heart of Darkness was the jungle as a force in itself that either corrupts you because of your fear of it, because you realize that the jungle is primeval. It is a force that you have to give yourself to something. And it's as simple as being afraid of the dark. And that what you do in the jungle is the same thing you do when you're a kid and you're afraid of the dark. You subject yourself to darkness. In the jungle, you go deeper and deeper into the jungle, as deep as you can. And when you're so afraid of the jungle and the spirits of the jungle, then you put on war paint. Then you become a creature of the jungle. Then you have totems. You become an animal. You start howling like a wolf or something or whatever it is. And of course, I did all this in Colorado. I would go out and I would sleep against a tree, convinced that a Yeti was on the other side of the tree. But I would take my rifle, and then I would sit there and I would say, this force, this primeval, spirits of the force, this primitive thing that's on the other side of the tree, the bear that's going to get me, I can't really deal with it without the rifle. So I have to leave the rifle at home. And I have to learn to sleep with just a knife. And then finally I have to stick the knife in the tree and sleep without anything there. And to do that, you have to give yourself to it. And that's exactly what Heart of Darkness is about. It's about the whole idea that Kurtz has given himself to these forces. And he's not only given himself to it, he's befriended them. And he's become part of that. So when I read that story, I was so absolutely transformed by it, more than any other short story, probably more than any other literature I'd ever read. Even before I met you, I said, I'm going to have to, I think when I read that, some of those articles, like the Michael Hare articles and stuff, I said, I really should start putting something down and thinking about it.
And then, like guys, contemporaries who were coming back for?
Yes, that too. I had a number of friends who just got back from Vietnam, and they talked about it and everything, and I talked to them a great deal, and I realized I had numerous people, a great deal of information I could get, and I started going and finding anyone I could who'd been in Vietnam.
Any surfers?
Oh yeah, there was a couple of surfers. There were very few surfers actually went, because most surfers figured out how to get out of the draft, which is very well illustrated in Big Wednesday. But you know, when it came time to talk to these people, I would just sort of collect everything I could, you know, that
Stories.
and so finally, I don't know whether maybe it was George that said, you should really start writing this thing. You should write this thing. You're the writer. You write stuff. You know, nobody else wanted to be a writer then. And so when it came time to do it, I thought of Heart of Darkness, and I said, that's what I should do. I should do Heart of Darkness in Vietnam. And, you know, I should use Heart of Darkness like an allegory. And I thought, well, I should go back and read it. And I said, no, I don't want to read it again, because I remember it as if it were a dream. And I want to read it, I want to have it always be that kind of dream. If I go back and I see it too exactly, I probably will screw it up.
So did you and George cook up the basic idea of a PBR going up a river, Heart of Darkness, or was this something you suggested to George, or he suggested?
That was just me.
That was you.
Yeah, George did. George just said, you know, put all the neat stuff in there, lots of helicopters.
It's important for people to realize that he was going to direct it.
Yeah, no one wanted to be a writer.
Right.
I mean, you know, writers have never been treated very well in Hollywood anyway. The big hero thing to be was a director. And the next big hero thing to be was a cinematographer, because then you got to hold the camera. And the camera was equipment, and people were always into equipment. The camera was kind of, you know, if you were in an infantry squad, you wanted to carry the M60. The camera was the M60, you know.
And so was George sort of saying, well, if you write this thing, maybe I can direct it?
Yeah, there was always the idea that George would, you know, matter of fact, I at that time, never conceived of myself as a director. I never thought I would be a director. And I don't know why, because, you know, I guess because I had not been in Hollywood. You know, I thought directors were people like Kurosawa or John Ford, you know, and how can you be one of those people, you know? And I didn't realize till I got into Hollywood how bad a lot of directors were, you know.
Do you remember that time when I came back with George from shooting The Rain People, and I had some little office at Warner Brothers, and we had the editing room next door, and that's when George started. That's when I think I first may have met you, when George started inviting some friends to come by, yourself, and I invited occasionally like Carol Ballard, and there was a little bit of a hangout right on the studio lot.
Absolutely.
Now, at what phase was Apocalypse Now then? You were actually writing it? You hadn't written it yet.
No, because I didn't really start writing it in earnest until you got that deal and literally hired me to write
So
it.
that was really when it really there started to be
That was when
pages.
it really started, when I started from page one. But I'd written lots of notes.
Yeah.
I'd written scores of notes. I'd written scenes that actually were very, very similar to what finally was in the movie.
I remember, I'd like to ask you when the title Apocalypse Now first came to mind, because I remember you had other titles. I remember you sometimes referred to it as the Psychedelic Soldier.
No, the other people did. It was always Apocalypse Now, because I had I would see all these things that hippies came in very suddenly from about 1965, all of a sudden. And hippies were good and bad, because I didn't believe it. I love beatniks, but hippies would often have a peace sign, and the peace sign would say Nirvana now. You know, in other words, you can get high, you can reach that state. Why wait? You know, take, you know, chemicals that will help you reach where, I mean, you don't have to study Zen, you don't have to do anything, Nirvana now. And so, of course, me wanting to be contrary, just probably for no other reason than to be contrary. And being sort of a warlike individual anyway, I took a peace sign and I converted it. It's got the, you've seen the peace sign. I put nacelles on it and a tail so that it became a B-52. And then I put Apocalypse Now.
That's great. So you invented Apocalypse Now out of the Nirvana Now, and the peace sign you turned into a B-52.
Right. And I had that, and I put it on some of my books or something, or carried it around, and everybody liked that. Now, it was long before anything was written.
Right.
And so that was always going to be the title.
Where did they had early on this extraordinary invention you did of the helicopter attack playing the psyops music, the Wagner, which is of course your creation. Everyone asks, "Oh, that was great what you did." I said, "I didn't do it. That was in the script."
When you listen to that music, and I love Wagner, it just lends itself to helicopters for some
How
reason.
did you come up with that? Because that was an early idea, wasn't it?
Yeah, but when I wrote the script,
Then
the two things that I thought about all the time were Wagner and the Doors. Because I wrote the script entirely to Wagner and the Doors. And that's all I did was I'd take that first Doors album and put it on and just play it. I must have played that until it just, I used it up or whatever.
And the Doors truly were favorites of the Vietnam guys?
Oh, yeah. And I remember
Light
the
My
Doors
Fire.
to me were always the Doors, that music was always music of war. And I remember telling that to the Doors, and they were just horrified. They just said, "This is the exact opposite of, how could you get this?" I said, "Worse yet, this is what their music is most famous for now."
Just a little footnote, ironically, the Doors were all UCLA film students.
Yeah.
When I was there, all of Ray Manzarek and Jim Morrison, who was the son of an admiral, a very important admiral, were all UCLA film students.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? And
I knew them at film school.
really?
And Morrison was an extremely quiet, introspective young fellow, very sweet, well-read. He used to love, he was a big Nietzsche fan. He knew all about Nietzsche, and he was a poet.
Well, he had to be. He had to be he was a extraordinary poet. You just listen to this stuff. It's just remarkable how good it is.
So what happened briefly then at that moment is I was able to wangle this deal at Warner Brothers, which is where we all were hanging out, and it was right around the time we all moved to San Francisco.
Of course, our idea of that, when you first came up with that, we all figured that if we were going to work in the business at all, we were, probably going to work at some commercial house cutting negative for years. And so the idea that you had sort of conned them somehow into bringing, this motley entourage over there, that we were actually going to be employed by a real big studio, And by that time, I had already gone to work. I was sort of the second guy out. You were the first guy. You'd blazed the trail, but you were so far ahead that I couldn't find the marks on the trees.
I was 5-6 years older. That's
Yeah.
a big difference. So what happened? We moved to San Francisco, and I got this money, and I took the money that they had given me, and I divided it up between you and George and Carol Ballard and Willard Hike, and I think that Steve
And
Wax.
I remember you came to me and you said, "How much do you need to live for a year?" And I said, and I was very bold, I said, $15,000. And you said, "I think I can get it for you." I couldn't believe it.
And to what extent? Because George also, I gave George this kind of that a like amount of money or something, because he wanted to do a feature version of THX, which
Yeah.
he did as our very first film. And to what extent, when you were writing The Apocalypse Now, how did you collaborate with George? Was he getting the pages as you were writing them, or was he sort of more working on his own thing and you were working alone?
He was really working on his own thing, and he just said, "Go on, keep doing it, tell me about some scenes that you have and stuff like that." And I don't think he read any of it until I had about 60 pages done.
Yeah, I don't think I did. Of course, there were like 6 guys writing scripts. We were like a little mini studio. But tell me about the writing of it as it really started to come to life? Because I think in that first script you had all the big ingredients:
Oh,
the
yeah.
helicopter battle, Colonel. His name was Colonel Carnage.
Yeah.
So tell us about actually writing
Colonel
the script.
Kurtz, that I had Kurtz in
Yeah,
there.
you had always Kurtz.
Yeah, always Kurtz, because the idea, I wanted to have that moment where he says, Colonel Kurtz, he dead.
He dead.
So
how was writing it? How did it start to unfold?
it unfolded pretty, systematically, because once it started and I knew I was going to go up this river, the river just led me.
How'd you invent the 4 characters on the boat? Mr. Clean, the chief.
Well, I knew that what there was on a PBR. I took the crew on a PBR, and I figured that there's going to be a chief who's in charge, and that Mr. Clean should be this young guy, from the Bronx or something, and that, the rock and roll. And then the chef was one of my favorites, because I loved the idea of a guy, and I thought that, even at the time, I thought that's really kind of absurd, this guy who's trained to be a saucier, and he's from New Orleans, and this kind of thing, and he ends up in the Navy and he can't stand it, because all the food is ruined, and this kind of thing. And so,
And then, of course, Lance.
Yeah.
Who was Lance based on? A real guy?
well, the character that I created of Lance is just a surfer. I just named him Lance.
Unfortunately, the beautiful kid who played Lance died far too young last year,
Yeah,
Sam Bottoms. But he embodied a good Lance.
Yes, he was. And that family were all surfers, so he understood it.
Right.
And,
He's a wonderful, wonderful young man.
yeah, he was. He was, I love the way he retained his innocence throughout the whole thing.
So you had the characters, you had the PBR, and then Willard. Willard was your Marlowe.
Yeah, and Willard was sort of, the idea of Willard was this guy, was a very complex character in a way, because Willard was a guy who was really ahead of his time. The character who's kind of been written about a lot now, but wasn't written about at all then, was a character who wasn't a warlike character, but he got high on the war. The war was his drug.
War lover.
Yeah, and he didn't have anywhere else he could go where he could live like that, and he didn't know what else to do. I mean, Willard is a poster boy for post-traumatic stress syndrome, and especially in the first scene. And I love the idea that Willard doesn't know where to go, doesn't know what to do, and they come to get him, and it's like he hopes they're going to come to get him. And, I needed a mission, and they brought me one. And after that one, I wouldn't need another, And of course, I think I was getting divorced when the movie was made. And I called you and I said, I need a mission. You said, I understand.
So then this led to this extraordinary helicopter Wagner. When you wrote that, you must have felt, my God, what have I done? How are they going to do this?
Oh, yeah. That whole scene, I thought the Wagner worked. I knew that would probably work, and I knew that they did have psyops where they, put speakers and played things, and
But they didn't play Wagner.
they didn't play Wagner. They played rock and roll and stuff like that. But no, I really thought the Wagner would work. I thought that it would be something that fit with helicopters and helicopter assault. And it works so well that you can't do a helicopter assault anywhere in the world without using Wagner today. That during Desert Storm, when the 101st landed behind the Iraqi lines, they had the helicopters flying over with the Wagner before the other helicopters came, so that everybody could hear the Wagner and run away and hear Ride of the Valkyries. And then the same thing in 2003 when they invaded. Every time the Apaches would go ahead, they'd put on the Wagner.
I got a letter from the great director Von Karajan, who I think conducted the version we used, but he was so blown away by the Wagner attack that he wanted to meet me and discuss other ways of using music with film, and then he died.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I wish I had that letter, but he was very, very impressed with it. So the script is pouring out of you, and you just are, can you tell us any more of this? Because you're having this all along. It's one of the points I wanted to make, is that you created Apocalypse Now. I didn't create Apocalypse Now. So you're sitting there alone, you typing?
No, I don't type anything. I write.
So
by
you're
hand.
writing this out, and you're writing one scene, every scene. Is there anything else as you Colonel Carnage then, or
Well,
kind
I
of
remember
tell us
that
about that?
when I was doing those scenes with Kilgore, the first Air Cav stuff, I was sort of aware, because when you're growing up and you study literature, you're supposed to put all kinds of allegories in. That's what writers do. So I thought, well, this is sort of like the Cyclops. This is like, Odysseus meeting the Cyclops.
That's wonderful for people to know.
And that, and then later when they meet the Playboy bunnies, those are the,
Sirens.
the sirens, And, this is the Cyclops, and he has to fool the Cyclops to get past. And then the only way he can fool him is with these surfers. And he finds the means. He says, here's Lance, here's Lance Johnson. And he kind of encourages him, and he says, we have to get up into this river, there's supposed to be really good surf up there. And
I love when he says, I'm a goofy foot.
yeah, yeah. And I love the idea that he, that it makes perfect sense that he would be interested in surfing, that he would want to go. The other thing that made me put that in there was, once again, going back to the 6-Day War, was there was an article I read about Ariel Sharon, and that Sharon had led this, armored incursion, this deep strike all the way down to Aqaba. And when they'd taken Aqaba, he got off of his tank and he loved to skin dive. And there were fish that were only in Aqaba. And he went out with his spear and shot some of these fish and then roasted them and ate them with his command staff as the Egyptian tanks are burning in the background and everything. And he said, we're eating their fish. We not only have gotten here and we've destroyed everything, but we're eating their fish. And that was the whole thing with the idea that we're going to surf their point. We're going to take their village, we're going to annihilate them, and then we're going to surf their waves.
What about your line, Charlie don't surf?
Yeah, well, that's what it comes to. And they said, well, we can't do that, That's Charlie's point. He says, look, Charlie don't surf, And that goes back to the idea of the whole thing with, Kilgore, is that somebody once, actually I came up with the idea that it was a California war, that as opposed to World War II, where the guys in World War II, if all the movies about World War II, there's always a guy from the Bronx, another guy's maybe from the Midwest, but nobody's from California. But our culture was centered at this time around California. The hippies and everything the whole world.
Beach Boys.
Yeah, everything was California. So, and of course the war became California. You'd constantly see pictures of helicopters with flames on the front, flames on the rocket pods, psychedelic writing on the front. Everybody, every grunt had a peace sign, peace, which was ridiculous, or peace through superior firepower, something like that on their helmet, they were constantly listening to hippie music and stuff like this. So it was this clash between California culture and this ancient place, that had resisted even Genghis Khan, that Vietnam, Indochina had resisted the French, had resisted everything, its culture.
Chinese.
Yeah, it resisted the Chinese and had absorbed and resisted everything. And now it had this thin film of communism on it. But underneath was this deep Oriental mysticism, this wonderful, inscrutable Oriental character that was coming up against California, against rock and roll, and drugs, and immense firepower.
Water skiing.
Yeah, water skiing.
Where did that come from?
The idea, doesn't it make sense that if you're on a PBR, you definitely want a water ski behind it, And
Did you invent it or hear that it happened?
no, I just thought that up. I thought, because surfers did that all the time,
You once told me a line that when I directed it, always held central, and I wonder, I'm sure you remember, you told me the line you heard somewhere is we teach the boys to drop fire on people and yet won't let them write the word fuck on their airplanes.
And that really was interesting that when I went to Desert Storm many years later, and I went to the Marine Air Group that was based in Bahrain, all the airplanes, and the Marines were, you know, they'd won their battles and everything, and all the airplanes were air superiority gray with the numbers on them and stuff like that. And the only thing that distinguished them, gave them personality, was they had the names of the pilots, you know, so-and-so Bud something or other, or so-and-so Moon something or other. But when you went over to the British, they had naked women on the sides of their airplanes and all kinds of, you know, things on them, you know.
Immoral things.
Yeah, lots of immoral things. And the British were so straight-laced and everything that somehow we have accepted the idea that we can't do this, you know.
While at the same time we were burning people
Yeah.
alive. And
Right.
so what I'm focusing on is basically how you invented all this stuff just when you wrote that first draft. And now you were getting through the middle of it. Can you tell us about how you invented the Playboy bunnies?
Oh, yeah, we got to go to the
How did you do that? How did you invent that?
Well, that was just logical. I mean, when you saw the whole idea of these shows, you know, where these incredibly sexy girls are brought there and, you know, displayed to thousands of men who may die the next day, what's going to stop them from taking those girls? You know, why wouldn't they take those girls, you know? And that must have happened many times where it kind of got out of hand, you know.
Did you ever hear that it had, or you?
I didn't ever hear that it had. In fact, most of the people told me that they were just so happy to see, you know, a girl from home, gyrating, looking sexy, and all that kind of thing, and just, you know, so happened just to see that was enough that made them feel good. But they did say there was a desire, you know, why don't we just go take these girls, you know, or something like this. And the whole idea that these guys would run into that and they would be tempted, because these are the sirens. These were supposed to be the sirens, you know, that they, you know, I really, you know, like the first version better where they don't ever touch them, because they can't touch the sirens. You can't touch the sirens or you'll end up on the rocks.
You mean when we edited out the subsequent, when they find that was in the script though, originally?
Yeah, it was. And when I liked it, when I saw the movie, I said, boy, I'm glad that part's gone, you know.
Well, with a flick of the switch, they can see the first version the way it is. And it's only if they want to waste another half hour that they can see the, you know, I mean, it's they're two different.
But I mean, that's what's sort of good about when a movie's made, and you know all the things that we did, and you and I went over so many things, and some of the stuff that you think that was great when you first wrote it, you sit there and go, oh my God, you know, how did I ever do that? And other things that are interesting, how they come out, like the famous lines of Duvall's.
Yeah.
And
you never know.
Yeah, you know, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Is that
That's when you used to do it yourself so
Yeah.
well.
But I thought, this is so over the top. This will be the first thing that comes out.
Well, he did it well.
He did it so well.
He was very committed to the character.
And what was great is he came to me and he asked me, he wanted to know what all those surfing terms were, exactly what they were. You know, he wanted to go down to Malibu, sit there and look at surfers, you know, see how they walked around, what they did. He wanted to, you know that when he talked about a cutback, what a cutback was, you know. And I love in the latest version where it comes to the conclusion that which is that they steal his board. You know, I love the fact that they steal his board and then he comes looking for it. I will not hurt or harm you. Just leave the board. It's awfully hard to get a good board, you know.
Well, you know, when we showed the movie first as you remember, when the movie first came out, it was very dicey which way it was going to go.
Yeah.
And I really had my life based on it. I had financed it, and you know, it was starting to get a kind of negative buzz. It got some horrible reviews. I remember the reviewer, Frank Rich,
Oh yeah,
wrote
he hated it.
in his review, he says, "This is the greatest disaster in all of 50 years of Hollywood." I'm thinking, gee, weren't there worse than Apocalypse? Weren't there movies in
Hello
40
Dolly was sort of, I think, was a...
Well, anyway, is it really the worst disaster? I felt my feelings were so hurt by this pronouncement, you know. But we were very anxious to kind of make the film at first into more of a conventional war film. So we went through, and it was, it was 2 hours and God knows 45 minutes long or whatever. And so we were trying to cut out, and we even cut out that nice opening where the helicopter lands and Kilgore steps out. We saved a little time there. We saved the stealing of the boards. We cut out we cut out a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah.
And then later on, it sort of, the movie started, the people kept going to see it at the Cinerama Dome, and it started to become, I was pulled from the jaws of death, or I dodged a bullet, as Mario Puzo used to say. And then many years later, we said, well, let's put it all back in, you know, and that's how it comes that there are two versions. But I'm still interested in you inventing this script, and now you're approaching, you said that you read about construction gangs and actual building of the bridge.
Yeah, they were building these bridges and building things. And I had a friend, a very close friend, Fred Rexer, who was in Special Forces and did demolitions with, he'd blow up these French bridges and rebuild them and stuff. And they were out there with these Bechtel Corporation construction gangs and stuff like this in the middle of this war zone. Not unlike what's going on right now in Afghanistan or Iraq. You know, I mean, this is what, I'm sure this happened all the time in World War II also, you know. And so the idea was that this bridge was sort of the last place, and the idea was that they would say this bridge is open, and at night the NVA or the VC would mortar it, and just enough to mortar it, you know, mortar the whole area considerably, or assault the area, try and tear it down so that they could say the bridge was down. And
just every day it was, depending what time it was up or down.
Right, and it would go back and forth, and that this bridge was the last vestige of real civilization.
Yeah. That's the way I thought of it in the movie when I was working on it. I said, once you get past the Long Bridge, everything else is totally surreal.
Yeah, then
you travel through time, you go into the jungle, you know, that's the gate.
And that there was another gate too, which was the tail of the B-52.
Yeah, that was a dramatic image to see
That
this.
once they passed, I remember when I wrote that scene, that the idea, and of course you write stuff that can never be done, but I wrote that they could go under the tail of the B-52 and the river widens, and there's all these beautiful waterfowl kind of circling. And then at the end of where it widens, it goes dark again into this sort of, the trees come over and it's like a hole, and it's going to hell, you know.
But so that was the script, more or less, unless there's anything else you want to add to
Well, the ending, of course, changed many times, and I wrote 10 different drafts of the script. Remember, there was a Steve McQueen draft, and
yeah, Steve McQueen. He sort of wanted to do it, but he was very ill at the time.
yeah, but I remember I had to go. That was quite a summer. I had separated from my wife, and I lived out at the beach, and I had to go talk to Steve McQueen and hang out with him, and he decided...
That was fun to hang out with him.
It was fun,
yeah.
But he decided he was going to take Spielberg and I and make us into men that summer. And so he took us to biker bars, and he was into full contact karate, which was just ridiculous. He'd get dressed up in these padded suits with this other guy, and they'd practice all these weird oriental moves, and then they just flail around like two little kids and fall on the floor. You know? But the greatest thing was, you know, we'd go eat hot dogs, and Steve McQueen was extremely cheap, and of course Steven's extremely cheap, and so I withdrew to see which one would break first, you know, to pay the bill. I don't remember who did.
They say Cary Grant was very cheap too. He would always leave to go to the bathroom when the bill came. So what I wanted to now transition to is, so here we had this script, Apocalypse Now, which was the best of the 6 or 7 scripts. I think I wrote The Conversation. We had Apocalypse Now. So what happened is I was in a tough spot where suddenly I have all these, I had to pay all this money. I had these 4 or 5 scripts. Most important was Apocalypse Now. And I went to George and I said, George, you can make Apocalypse Now. And he had a plan on how to do it. He was going to make it very, very differently.
Oh yeah, no, we were going to do it. I mean, he loves to tell the story, which is true.
It's true.
That I wanted to go to Vietnam while the war was still going and make the movie in Vietnam, because there had been movies made like that. They made this movie called Medium Cool, in which it was filmed during the riots at the Democratic Convention. But we wanted to actually go to Vietnam. And it was really
not George.
I mean, but there were other people, who part of our group who would never. They would sooner go to Canada than be in the army, or they would sooner do something really rash like get married or something. But they were perfectly willing to go make a movie in Vietnam. They would thread their way through the tripwires and snakes and tigers and stuff, and to make a movie. I mean, it was just really interesting how people will do anything to make a movie.
George wanted to make the movie up in Stockton.
Yeah.
In black and white, 16 millimeter, get a couple of helicopters and just basically do it in a kind of pseudo-documentary style.
Yeah, he wanted to copy Battle of Algiers.
Which is not a bad idea.
I mean, it's an interesting idea. I don't think it would have, looking back on it, because we believed in cinema verite then. We believed that would something that was really cool that you'd watch. Now you look at it, you realize you can't. That you can sustain that for about a half hour.
Well, so I went to George and I said, George, we have Apocalypse Now. Make it. And at that point, I'm not sure, it was Star Wars.
He didn't want to make it. Once he'd started, off on Star Wars. And he started, remember, he was going to do Apocalypse before Star Wars. But once he made...
Graffiti.
Yeah, American Graffiti.
And he had the
got
taste
rich.
of success, and he got rich.
He got rich. He didn't want to make Apocalypse Now. He did not want to go where they have many different varieties of poisonous insects. He did not want to go to a place that rained every day and was miserable and there were, tigers.
Right. So I go to you and I say, okay, George is the one to do it. Apocalypse Now, you made Dillinger. You're a terrific director. Why don't you direct it? You wrote it. You created it. And you said, well, I'm going to do The Wind and the Lion, or I'm going to do this incredible other thing. So I said, I don't know. I'm in a real pickle here, because what we really need is we need a movie that is a big hit so we can make a lot of money, so then we can make all these little art films that we want to make. So I said, what if we made Apocalypse Now, if I made it, and instead of doing it the way George wants to do it, as a kind of Battle of Algiers, what if I do it as a kind of IMAX spectacle, color, go make it bigger and as big as I can do it, and go the opposite direction of George, and then make it, so it can be a hit like The Guns of Navarone, or it's one of those big, because you thought a war movie could make a lot, and we'll make a lot of money, and then I can make the, little movies, like I had done The Conversation, because I had gotten to make The Conversation because of the success of The Godfather. So I said, well, I'll do it. I had no real reason to do Apocalypse Now, except I did very much like the script, and I liked Hearts of Darkness, but also I figured this is a chance, which was always the holy grail, make some huge picture that makes a ton of money, and then make little Roger Corman type budget art films. And I want to be a writer. That's my great limitation, is I only want to direct my own scripts. Well, it's like I'm addicted to this writer I got to drag along.
Yeah.
And I'm.
Well, I remember the wonderful thing you said, because you were really worn out after Godfather 2.
Oh.
And then when they gave you all the Oscars, you said, oh, at least it was worth it. You said, but I never want to go through anything like that again.
Well, it was Godfather 1 that was the thing that killed me. Godfather 2, which was a big film, was relatively, I had a lot of power then to really be the producer. I didn't have Bob Evans to drive me nuts, and I could just make it in freedom. But what really struck me was that they give me all these Oscars, and I was sitting on top of the world. I'd made The Godfather Conversation, Godfather 2 in 3 years, and nobody wanted to let me make Apocalypse Now, and no studio would give me money.
But I remember
no
the
actor
wonderful,
would go to be inside the film.
the wonderful thing you said, the script's done. I just have to go do this. I just have to go shoot it. It'll be so easy.
What was
I'll just go to Hawaii.
What was I thinking with these helicopters?
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
we'll get some helicopters
I
and go to
absolutely
Hawaii, you know. And
didn't know what I was getting myself into. I mean, it was ridiculous. In fact, I became an early sort of prophet of the electronic cinema. It was all because I used to say, God, there's got to be a better way to do a movie than sitting here. I'm in the mud. I'm in bankruptcy, or I'm going to be in bankruptcy. This thing is going on for 2 years. There's got to be a better way to make movies. The helicopters, every time in Apocalypse you see a scene where there are helicopters, there were another 6 too high because the pilots were afraid to get low in the shot. So, at any rate, so I went into making the film with that spirit of just, I'm going to make this big war film, it's going to make a lot of money, and then I'm going to make little art films and be a writer for the rest of my life, which absolutely didn't happen. Well, John, I just want to thank you so much for coming and
what a wonderful opportunity! What a great thing to tell these stories.
I do hope that people now who see this, when they see the movie, know and have heard it right from your mouth, where these things and how these things were created.
I love the idea that what you touched on before was that the life of these things, that people should go back and read the original reviews of Apocalypse Now, because there are no good ones.
But there are no good. There are a lot of good reviews of The Godfather.
Really?
Oh yeah. Read the Variety review of The Godfather. It totally trashes it. So people, young filmmakers especially, I want them to get out of it is that, these movies come out and they may be considered failures at first, but the real sign of I think, greatness in a movie is that if people will still look at it in 40 years, and not what won the Oscar that year.
Absolutely. You cannot ever give up. You have to realize that that is the quality that people would say to me, what is the strongest quality in a director? And I said, tenacity. Being able to deal with sleep deprivation. Never quit. Never give up. That you have to be like Geronimo. That you just, you have to be out there with as little, whatever you're reduced to, you keep going. And you look at all these movies that are the great movies that we love now, and we look at them, and every one of them, you can tell a story about. With your great advice to me, when I directed my first movie, you said there'll be 6 times you'll want to kill yourself. Don't worry about it till the 7th.
So, John, I always want to ask you to autograph this for me. This was the script. This was the script, Apocalypse Now, and I had this brilliant idea in those days to print it up like a small Samuel French playbook, because you could put it in your pocket. And now, of course, everyone does this, but this was another innovation of Zoetrope. And this is interesting. This is the actual. When I went around to make the movie, I knew the script so well, I never even carried it, but I carried this. And I was constantly, every time I was doing a scene, I was going through this very thing. This was my Bible during the actual making of the movie, and it still has some of the scenes of things. We penetrated deeper and deeper into the heart of darkness. It was very quiet there. At night, sometimes the roll of drums behind the curtain of trees would run up the river and remain sustained faintly, as if hovering in the air high over our heads till the first break of day. Whether it meant war, peace, or prayer, we could not tell. So that I wanted to show you, and this I'm going to beg you to autograph to me.
There.
This is it's $1 million on eBay. You want to eat something?
Yeah, let's go.
Go get some good. I have healthy stuff. Broccoli.
Wait, I got